I can just figured it out. Great. So got people from Northwest, got a couple of South Spring Garden. No West Philly. Guess it's just Erica and I that I gotta represent West. Okay. Now, and then I think there's a way that I can do this. It shows like a word map, but thank you all for coming. And I am going to spend a little bit of time talking about our Wreck It Philly campaign. My name is Alex Doty, and I am the Executive Director of the Parks and Rec Heroes Fund, which we have changed our name, rebranded from the Philadelphia Parks Alliance. And what we are excited about over the next year is this tree plan being a part of a whole conversation about how it is that we are funding Parks and Rec, and a conversation that we want to have for the candidates for mayor so that we can have a healthy Parks and Rec system for the next term. And as part of that conversation, I have very happy to have with us Erica Smith-Fichman, who works for Parks and Rec and has been doing what to my mind is just an extraordinary job of engagement and policy thinking and managing community and agency, which is always just such a cauldron, such an interesting space to be. And rather than kind of shying away from that or sort of trying to manage in the way that's easiest, I feel like Erica's really dug in and engaged and led a team that's really been doing some great work. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. We're not at the point where that plan is quite public yet. There's still some stuff that's happening in review kind of on the city side, but the thing that is most engaging to me is how it is that Erica and her team's analysis of the canopy in the city of Philadelphia really addresses broader issues of equity and how it is that we provide services to our neighborhoods. So I'm looking forward to getting to have a conversation about that. And but I'm going to start off by introducing the Wreck It Philly campaign. So what we're talking about are three areas of focus here. We want to have safe and clean sites. We want that in every neighborhood. We want to have more recreation programming, and we want to grow the urban forest. Those are the things that we've been focusing on and how it is that we want to both message, but also from a policy standpoint, come up with all the things that need to support this in order to convince the next mayor to increase support for Parks and Rec. That's really remarkable to think about. We have over 300 neighborhood parks, rec centers, and playgrounds that are being maintained by 408 people. That includes 74 pools, 200 tennis courts, 400 basketball courts, 600 athletic fields, 7 watershed parks that have 4,500 acres, 166 miles of trails. When we express frustration with how our spaces are not being taken care of, it's because there's not enough people to take care of them. And that's because we don't spend very much money on the operations of Parks and Rec. So this is per capita spending on the operations for Parks and Rec. And in Philadelphia, we're spending $50 per person. Chicago is spending $177 per person. You know, so maybe you sit there and say, well, we're not Chicago. Well, Baltimore's spending $125 per person, and Newark is spending $73 per person. We are an outlier. We are not taking care of our public spaces in Philadelphia. So the national average, and this is information from the Trust for Public Land, of the top 100 largest cities in the US, that the average for what's being spent is $98. We're spending 50. So that's and that we take pride in being a city of parks, and a city that has more pools than any other city in the US, and yet we're spending so little. So this hurts us all, but the pain is not shared equally, right? So Eric's going to talk about this in terms of how it is that tree canopy, and in December we'll be talking about how program deserts are created because of the ways that we fund program staff. But the result of this is that this is the pain is not shared equally. And one thing that you can see, we've got a 22-degree difference. I'm stealing a little bit of Erica's thunder here, but when it's 80 degrees in leafy Chestnut Hill and parts of Hunting Park, it's 102 degrees. There are a number of factors that contribute to that, but tree canopy is right up there, right? And why aren't people planting trees, right? Because that's not a piece of infrastructure that we think about as being something that the city takes care of. We leave that to homeowners. We leave that to property owners. And so what we want to do is try and really give people the tools to be able to engage in to kind of personalize this, right? That 22-degree difference. Well, what's the difference between your neighborhood and the coolest neighborhood in Philadelphia? So we've created a map where you can look, you can search for addresses, you can sort of zoom in and out and be able to see what the temperature is. You can set the lowest temperature on a bar, and then you can explore the rest of the map. And I think Steve is going to put a link in there to the chat. So while I really want you to follow along with my slides, you can also be doodling around with that as we go along here. But if we want to get people to plant trees, we need, we can't leave all of that just up to the neighborhood. That's, that just is furthering inequity. So we have a 23,500 tree backlog for pruning and removal. Parks and Rec is responsible for the maintenance of all street trees in Philadelphia, but they don't have the crews to do it. And so every year, it's not that this backlog is sitting there at 23,000, right? It's increasing. This situation is getting worse. It's not getting better. And that's a very important thing for us to take care of, so that we can build trust. So as we talk about this, as I said, we've got these 3 pillars. We've got 3 different webinars that we're going to be conducting to think about that. And so we'll get into kind of more detail, but wanted to share with you, and you can go to our website. We've got ideas about what are kind of the benchmarks for having safe and clean sites. What are the benchmarks for having more recreation programming? And so, what does it take for the next mayor to get to these standards? And so we know that there are really robust suggestions or recommendations within the tree plan. We want to have those implemented, but some of the basic things that we want to see, we want to see reductions in heat islands, and I think that that's the most compelling way to talk about tree canopy, because we can all relate to that, right? You can all relate to the tree canopy, and one of the things all relate to heat islands, and we know that that's not going to get better on its own, right? I mean, that with climate change, that's only going to get worse, and we've got to eliminate that 23,500 tree care backlog. So as we think about the Parks and Rec budget, mayors have historically looked at the Parks and Rec budget as a burden to be minimized. And what we need to do is start changing the conversation so that Parks and Rec is an asset for the next mayor to achieve broader city goals. The Parks and Rec budget, it's kind of like they'll get along with whatever they get along with. They always figure it out. They always get by. It's the first agency to get cut. It's the last one to get restored. But that's led to things like the 23,500 tree backlog and parks and rec centers that don't feel like that are not clean and do not look like they are well taken care of because there's not enough staff to take care of them. So how do we have the mayor think about how it is that Parks and Rec serves broader city goals? Remarkable opportunities for being able to provide neighborhood jobs for teens and young adults, have more out of school time slots and quality out of school time, restore faith in quality city services, create safe spaces in every neighborhood, and that in addressing these and providing these basic services, we're addressing racial inequity, and we're building resilience to climate change, which it would be great if that was going to be a more prominent issue within the mayoral campaign. But it's there. It's a thing we need to think about. When we talk about heat islands, we're talking about that. Here's good news that when Philadelphians are thinking about the budget, they have, this is according to the mayor's budget engagement process for last year's budget, which, well, I mean, it was conducted last year for this year's budget. 4 top priorities: public safety, racial equity, public spaces and parks, streets and sanitation. And a lot of that is like, I mean, and addressing the things that we're talking about for Parks and Rec really addresses a lot of it. It's really addressing kind of all 4. So Parks and Rec is popular. It's not budgeted like it's popular, but it's popular. Park visitation continues to be up. It was up 50% in the pandemic, and we've seen these budget focus groups. So this is a winning issue. It's visible. It's popular. Because the service is so bad, it's had an impact in every neighborhood to lift this up. But it has a bigger impact in neighborhoods that are experiencing gun violence and high poverty. So I think all these things are kind of winning issues, and how do we tie Parks and Rec to that broader conversation that's going to be happening within the mayoral campaign? So, and it's just, I mean, part of this is also just like, who doesn't love Parks and Rec, right? But how do we convert that into substantial policy changes and budget changes? And so we're doing that with this series of forums, and then we're going to have, we're launching our Parks and Rec Heroes Day. We're just, at the moment, this March 25th date is penciled in, I have to say, and we're working on, we keep having partners kind of adding pieces to it. But that will include a mayoral candidates forum. And in addition to that, the other thing that we're getting ready to launch is that we're going to have a series of, or a group of teen interviewers who are going to ask questions of the mayoral candidates that we're going to gather from the community at large. So this is our text line for anybody that wants to ask the mayor a question. I mean, I will only collect the ones that you're going to ask me about Parks and Rec. I don't have any way of being able to handle any other kind of question. But if you want to, and also there will be a way to do this through the Slido in a minute. But this is what we're going to start pushing out as we're going out into different communities. We're starting to engage with all the different friends of groups and going to rec centers and rec advisory councils. And we'll return to some of this call to action at the end here, but you can go to parksrecheroes.org, have your organization join the Rec at Philly Coalition, or you can sign a petition as just a citizen. And we've got various infographics. And the other thing is, if you want me to come out and talk to anybody, but with the presentation like this, I am ready to take the Dog and Pony Show on the road, in person, virtually, what have you. But if you're interested in hosting a presentation, or if you just want to present some of our infographics as a deck, however you want to do that, I'm game. So I just wanted to close with, if you can't come up with anything else, if you see a candidate in the wild just go up and ask them, how will you increase funding for Parks and Rec? We need them to hear not just from us in scheduled meetings, right? But when they're out there talking to people, we need to tell them that Parks and Rec is important. So throughout the course of our presentation here, if you want to use this this link to suggest questions for how we want to, what, you know, as, and I'm just giving you the prompt as Mary, what will you do about, if you want to come up with a different way of phrasing it, you know, feel free. And if you're more comfortable just putting it into the Q&A or into the chat, then however you want to do it, I'd love to hear it. So that is my introduction to the Wreck It Philly campaign. And so we're really excited to be able to have a plan to support and not just say, hey, trees are important, right? But to be able to give policy recommendations to the next mayor is a pretty phenomenal tool for us to be able to use. So really excited and thankful for the work that you and your team have done on this, Erica, and looking forward to hearing about how it is that the tree canopy and the tree plan are going to address equity within Philadelphia.
Thank you, Alex. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Philly tree plan. I'm going to go through a little bit of why we should care, what we're seeing in the city, how we put the plan together, and then what some of the top level recommendations are. We are working very hard on releasing the plan to the public, but it's not quite ready. So, you know, stay tuned on that. But, and I also apologize in advance. I have small children downstairs who may interrupt at times, hopefully not into the room, but you may hear some noises. So there's that too. So the Philly tree plan, sorry, how do I advance my screen? My name is Erica Smith Fichman, and I am the Community Forestry Manager at Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. So that means that I manage a team of amazing community organizers that do work in neighborhoods to work with residents to try to grow and care for the urban forest in the ways that are the most supportive of those communities. And that can be many things. It can be yard tree giveaways, it can be tree plantings, it can be street tree plantings, education training, many things. But I also am the project lead for the Philly tree plan. So I want to go over a little bit. I think there may be a wide range of people on this call. So I want to define, you know, what is the urban forest? So the Philly tree plan is a plan for our urban forest. And when we talk about that, we mean all of the trees in the city, because trees don't understand property lines, right? So we're talking about street trees, yard trees, park trees, natural areas, riparian, campuses, alleyways, vacant lots. We want to manage it as a whole. And there are many different tools that we have to use to do that. And why do we care about the urban forest? The urban forest is the lungs of the city. The leaves of the trees capture particulates from the air. And of course, we all know that trees give us oxygen. Alex alluded to this before, but the urban forest is our protection from the heat. You can see in the graphic behind Alex's head the drastic difference between different neighborhoods in the city. And we know that there is a huge role that trees play in that difference. So you can see where on this map, where the trees are, where the areas are that are hotter versus cooler. And there is a 22-degree difference between hot and cool neighborhoods in the city. And the urban forest promotes our mental health. There are many different studies that prove this. from, people recovering more quickly if they can see greenery from their hospital room, to the many different ways that mental health manifests itself and how access to greenery can affect that. But we know in Philadelphia that our urban forest, like many urban forests across the country and the world, is not fairly distributed. You can see from this map that it is clustered in some of the areas that are higher income. And we can see when we layer data on top of each other, some of the correlations. There are fewer trees where there's more poverty. So you can see the areas with more poverty, fewer trees. There are fewer trees in Black and brown neighborhoods. You can very easily see in this graphic. And there are fewer trees in areas with more gun violence. And tree canopy, correlates with this, as you can see from this graphic. But it is part of a more holistic answer to the problem of gun violence in our city. We also know that between the years 2008 and 2018, we lost 6% of our tree canopy, and that is about 100 football fields worth of tree canopy. It was clustered in some certain areas of the city, as you can see from this map. Some of these areas couldn't afford to lose very much tree canopy to begin with. And so this is another issue. So the Philly Tree Plan is a response to what we're seeing in the tree canopy, how it's distributed, how it has developed over time. And the mission is to create a 10-year plan for the planting and care of the urban forest, guided by 3 core values. That's environmental justice, community engagement, and sustainability. And throughout the planning process, we've been talking about this in more plain language by saying that the Philly Tree Plan is going to work to bring the benefits of trees to communities that need them most in ways that support them the best. So when we got started creating the Philly Tree Plan, we had a project team of dedicated, wonderful people from across the institutions that manage our urban forest. So we had other city departments, the water department, the commerce department. We had PHS representatives, Fairmount Park Conservancy representatives, state agency representatives like the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and the Forest Service as well. But we knew that the plan could not be created by these institutional players. It needed to be informed by the people. And so the very first thing we did was to create a community voices steering committee, and that informed a lot of the portions of the plan that came afterwards. That was part of the engagement we did, but we had 7 different tools that we used to get people's opinions about the urban forest, including going on a meeting tour across the city, having a neighborhood ambassador program where people participated in a 6-week paid program where they learned about urban forestry, but more importantly, talked to their neighbors and community members about urban forestry and had really honest conversations that they recorded and gave to us so that we could see how people were talking about the urban forest. And we did a citywide survey, which we got over 7,000 responses from. So I'm going to go through some of these engagement tools. Our Community Voices Steering Committee, they advised on a number of aspects of the plan, including mapping priority areas. So we used a bunch of different variables, including poverty, health factors like asthma, heat, and some other variables to identify the neighborhoods and areas of the city that are most vulnerable to the lack of tree canopy. And those are areas that feature in our community engagement so that we can ensure that those residents have a say in how the Philly Tree Plan is created, but also in implementation so that those areas are receiving priority in terms of investment and resources into the future to make up for past disinvestment. You can see the community meetings that we went to were clustered around those priority areas. The orange areas on this map are the priority areas that we identified with our Community Voices Steering Committee. These community meetings were pre-existing meetings that we attended. Alex referred to my amazing team, and Marissa Wilson on my team did the bulk of these meetings. She talked for a little while, but she mostly listened and transcribed many pages of notes about what people had to say about trees. And we clustered them in those priority areas, as you can see. We also created the Neighborhood Ambassador Program, as I said, and those folks were also from those priority areas. So we had 22 people in 5 cohorts across the city, and we did walk shops where we walked through the neighborhood and talked about what people were seeing. They participated in a visual storytelling exercise. So they documented how they interacted with trees, and then they did peer interviews with their friends, family, and community members to get a different perspective on trees. People will talk to their friends in a way that's a bit more honest than they might talk to an interviewer on the street or when they're filling out a survey. And so these peer interviews were really important for the data collection for how people are feeling about trees. We also did that citywide survey trying to make it accessible to anyone in the city who wanted to say something about trees. And we again used those priority areas to try to make sure that those responses were coming from priority areas, or at least the priority areas were responding in equal measure to the non-priority areas. And so about halfway through, we took a quick break to evaluate where the responses were coming from. And then we created yard signs and door hangers and paid folks to do phone calls and text messages that were focused in those neighborhoods that were not represented yet in the citywide survey responses in those priority neighborhoods. So we were very proud that ultimately around 60% of the responses for that survey came from areas that were high or medium priority. And this is just a little summary. Over 7,000 survey responses in 8 different languages, which was as many languages as we translated it into. So we kind of wish we had translated it into even more, because we wanted to get them from as many people as possible. Those neighborhood ambassadors conducted 62 peer interviews, and those community meetings engaged almost 850 residents from across the city, focused in priority areas. The key takeaways that we learned from all of this, many of them are not surprising, but it is good to document this. You know, people who work in urban forestry and people who interact with trees in any aspect of their life know these things. Trees have value, but we learned that we really don't have to focus too much on educating people about the value of trees. They recognize that trees have value, but trees can be a burden to homeowners. And so the disconnect is often between understanding that trees have value, but not trusting that there are systems in place to support you if something goes wrong. So there is a disparity in tree canopy. We saw that on the map, but people feel it and it feels personal. People have poor access to programs, so there's a need for more consistency, clarity, coordination, and people see maintenance of the existing tree canopy as a trust building activity. So we also know that protecting existing trees so that they can grow bigger is the best way to grow your tree canopy. So maintenance is a really huge part of the tree plan. So we took all of this engagement and focused it into 8 goals. I'm going to take a quick of water and everyone can read these and then I'll go over them. And I'll go over them in a little bit more detail as well. So coordinating support for trees, protecting the existing and future urban forest, growing the urban forest equitably across the city and reducing the burden of trees on residents, investing in people and communities, communicating with residents, and improving customer service, advocating for communities to benefit from the urban forest, what we're doing here and what Alex is leading, and celebrating and supporting the ways that communities are already engaging with trees. So I'm going to go through some of the top level recommendations from the plan. Again, these are it's still in draft form and is not being released yet, but these are some of the larger themes from the plan. So creating an urban forestry position, a city forester position and support team to create that single point of contact for tree related activities in the city. Prioritizing those areas that have the most need according to the map that we created. And then of course, improving coordination amongst city agencies and amongst stakeholders. And many of these recommendations have several sub recommendations that are required in order to have this happen. But that level of detail will be in the plan. Protecting the existing and future urban forests. So this includes updating the zoning code to protect more trees and to protect the trees that do exist in better ways and throughout the development process, and protecting our natural lands. We have over 5,000 acres of natural areas. So that means forests, wetlands, meadows, and riparian areas that are doing a huge amount of work for us and making our city livable, and we need to protect them. And there are many ways that we can improve the way that we protect those lands and restore those lands. Grow the urban forest equitably across the city. So we, again, can update the zoning code to increase the requirements for how many trees are planted and to improve the way that those trees are taken care of in the establishment period. We can prioritize larger tree plantings because we know that larger tree plantings are more impactful and not only in placemaking, but also physically, and creating a tree fund to help fund some of this through developer fees. Planning for a resilient future forest, so that includes native species and climate resilience and other things. Reducing the burden of trees on residents. As Alex was saying before, we need to take care of the trees that we already have better. And that means that we need to clear out some of the backlog of trees that we know need service, need pruning, or need removal, and transition from a reactive system, which is what we have now, to a proactive inspection cycle, so that we are looking at all of the trees in the city on a cyclical basis to catch problems before they become bigger problems. And creating new tree care and support programs for residents. We heard many times, and anyone who works with urban forestry knows that sidewalks are a huge part of the way that people experience trees in the city. So addressing in some ways what that burden is and how it can be alleviated, assisting with the removal of weed trees, and then helping people to select the right trees for their private property and give them establishment care, so that we can grow the tree canopy on private property in a way that is sustainable and with the right tree in the right place. Investing in people and communities. This really looks like finding new ways to pay people to care for trees in their neighborhoods, and improving the pathway from workforce development to careers in urban forestry, and evaluating the positions and the requirements for the urban forestry positions to remove barriers to entry. Communicating better with residents. So improving communication and customer service. There are many ways that we plan on doing this, and creating resources like maps and reports to increase the transparency so people can see what is happening to the urban forest and what progress we're making on the priorities that the residents have. Advocating for communities to benefit from trees. So this looks like having more community organizers out there to support people, especially in the priority areas. Expanding youth programming so that more kids are involved from a younger age, and establishing an urban forestry advisory committee so that residents can get involved in decision making. And finally, supporting, celebrating the ways that communities engage with trees. Food producing trees are a huge cultural and spiritual connection that people have to, a way that people connect to trees. And so protecting and supporting food producing trees across the city, and sharing resident stories. Those 7,000 survey responses, many of them included entire stories, sometimes poems, sometimes quotes, and other things that were really meaningful to people. And we want to be able to share that information out with people and celebrate trees. So as I said, those neighborhoods, those priority neighborhoods are going to be seen in the final plan itself as well. So we will outline planting and funding goals for each of those priority areas to increase the tree canopy. We are going to develop plans at the neighborhood level to support residents in growing the tree canopy. Coordinating between the city and nonprofit partners around these priority areas so that we are able to support residents throughout these areas, and laying out principles for how we are doing collaborative community engagement with residents. And that's the end of my quick overview of the Philly Tree Plan, and I am happy to answer questions and have a conversation. Before we do that, though, I do want to say that there are a number of people who have really been a huge part of this plan. There's that Community Voices Steering Committee, project team, all of our ambassadors, so many people, and I know that there's at least one person who participated on the Community Voices Steering Committee here, Temwa Wright, and I would love Temwa to kind of.
Should we invite her in?
Yes, we should invite Temwa to come say a few words about what trees mean to her and what her experience has been. Hey, Temwa.
Hi, everybody. Technology is so cool. You guys didn't know I was here, and then pop, here I am.
And we figured out how to use it.
Half the battle. We're still figuring it out, as you see in the chat. We're still figuring some things out, right? But thank you for having me here. So I thought it would be good to kind of talk about what it was like for me as a resident of Cobbs Creek to participate in the Community Voices Steering Committee. It was such an honor to be part of this planning process for the Tree Philly Plan. And Cobbs Creek being one of those neighborhoods that was targeted to really increase the tree canopy. And I think the two things that really resonated with me with being part of this process is I really appreciated the thorough nature and the timeline and the engagement and everything that went into planning how to do this in a way that brings diverse voices and communities together. Because what I've noticed in environmental circles, because I'm very ecologically friendly and I'm environmentally aware and I love trees, but a lot of the times you're preaching to the same choir. Everybody loves trees and everybody wants to have more trees. And so when you're in these kind of small like-minded people, maybe people who might be on this webinar because they want to see this increase in the tree forestry, right? You sometimes don't realize there's so many different perspectives and voices that still need to be heard when you're creating such an expansive plan. So I really appreciated just the thoughtfulness that went into the plan, especially in engaging a wide variety of feedback and voices and people and neighborhoods. It was really well thought out, and it enhanced my thinking too, and made me appreciate things. Like when you think, and one of those 8 goals is how do you reduce the burden on residents? Because some people can't stand trees. They don't want more trees. And why? Because they've had negative experiences. So if you don't honor and understand those experiences, then your plan is going to totally, miss this opportunity of getting people to buy in by addressing some of those root issues. So I really appreciated that, the input, the intentional just getting diverse feedback and input. And it also made me a different kind of park user, honestly, because I felt much more empowered. So, seeing all that went into the plan, all of a sudden I started looking at my local park differently. I lead regular cleanups in Cobbs Creek Park, and they're like every Wednesday, power hour cleanups. I engage neighbors so we can, clean up the park. When you, Alex, talk about the city parks, the Philly park system being underfunded and understaffed, I think about like how this year, the team I'm part of, the Cobbs Creek Ambassadors, which is a group of neighbors that do regular cleanups in the park. This year, we have collected almost 12,000 pounds of trash from the park, from Cobbs Creek Park alone, 12,000 pounds of trash. And sometimes when you're trying to engage people, they're like, that's the city's job. Why are you doing the city's job, right? And it's like, no, this is our park too. But the truth is, in other cities, it probably wouldn't be as messy because they invest the resources to keep it clean. But I also know, as a Cobbs Creek resident, that in other parks in the city, they are cleaner than the one in my neighborhood. So there's a lot of equity issues. But what it made me, it kind of changed my perspective of how I use my current park, being part of the Community Voices Committee, because I remember once I was doing a cleanup and I'm looking at my at the park, at Cobbs Creek Park, I was like, this is an unhealthy forest. I said, there's a lot of trees here that are falling apart. And now we have a plan to increase the tree canopy, but then we also have trees that are dying. And I'm thinking, well, how are we going to meet this goal and also take care of the current trees? And then when I saw things that were happening around me that did not align with the plan, it made me a stronger advocate. So it's really important to be informed in this work. I get excited about a lot of things. So I talk really fast, you'll catch up or not, and you can, put something in the chat and ask. But it's really important to be informed about what the city is doing and the investments they're making and the plans they have, because it helps you to be a stronger advocate. You can say, listen, I know the city is, has lost 6% of the canopy and has a goal to increase it by, I don't know if it was 20%. I forgot what the goal is in the plan. Correct me if I'm wrong. What was the goal?
Well, we are using 30% canopy as a benchmark to get towards, because we know that 30% tree canopy has proven benefits and life-saving benefits according to U.S. Forest Service research.
Okay, so we're saying 30%, right?
Yeah.
Great. This is a great ambitious goal, right? And there's a whole, there's so many details in how they'll get there. And obviously the plan hasn't been fully released, but I had the privilege to be able to see some of the preview and draft of the plans, which is really well thought out in detail. But what I'm saying is, when the city has these goals, it helps you to be that better advocate to say, well, this is what's needed, or this is how I contribute to that. So I told you I do these cleanups in Cobbs Creek Park. Well, each year we kind of pick what's going to be our focus this year. And so this year that we're about to end, we actually adopted what we call a T-cubed strategy. We said the Cobbs Creek Ambassador are going to do a T-cubed strategy. We're just not going to do trash. We're going to do trash, trees, and trails, right? And because for us, we also want to contribute to the city's goal. So we see, well, this is an unhealthy forest. Why? Because we have invasive vines and we have, you know, certain things that are just not happening. But what can we do as volunteers? Oh, well, let's involve some of our volunteers in removing some of the invasive vines in our park, right? You see yourself as part of the goal, because the city, this goal for the tree Philly plan is not just the city's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility. It's those who are already working with trees. It's those who utilize trees. It's those who have trees on their block in their neighborhood. But if everybody takes a part of that whole, it actually is achievable. But if it's only owned by the city, then it's really going to be difficult to meet a lot of those numbers and goals. So I can talk ad nauseum about things I'm passionate about, but that's really all I wanted to share, that this was a really just amazing opportunity to be part of something that's healthier for us, for our communities, and is going to improve the overall, you know, well-being for the city.
Kemla, thank you so much for sharing that experience. When you were talking about reaching the non-tree huggers, let's say, right? Did you have any experience like that as you were talking about the plan? Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. I have lots of non-tree huggers in my network, and yeah, we did have that experience. You know, I've had it as a neighbor. We talked about it strategically in the community voices, and as I said, it's one of the things is to understand why somebody would not be an advocate for more trees in the city. And I think if you understand the why, then you can generate resolutions and suggestions that can kind of tackle that. So Erica talked about the sidewalks busting. Well, those trees that were planted in the sidewalks were not appropriate for small blocks, right? Now there's more appropriate trees that get planted, but if somebody has that negative experience historically, they're going to be less likely. So I know for my neighbors who haven't necessarily been as receptive to trees, it's been to the goal has been to model and to show something different, and to also show the benefits of having more trees, which takes time sometimes, honestly.
Yeah, and sidewalks are, even without trees, are an issue for the city, right? I mean, that's one of those things where we say that's a common good, but it's your private responsibility, and that's also the way that we're treating trees. And you know, the challenge of putting the individual burden onto someone to maintain something which has a communal benefit is and when you're talking about renters and you're talking about something that's the landlord is even less likely to want to try and tackle. And where do we find this balance between people being enthusiastic and engaged and caring for things, but we're not relying on them to provide those basic and essential services, right? So even when you're talking about picking up trash, and to me, that is inspiring when people are doing it, and I love doing it. And I do it on Cobbs Creek sometimes. It's where I got a picture of a dead tree on Cobbs Creek that I was showing earlier. But beautification should be what friends of and volunteers are engaged in, right? And beautification is not really about removing tires, right? That's, you know, can we be moving more towards, you know, pruning? I don't think there are any volunteers who are removing trees, right? We all like, how do you engage in this process where volunteers can be a part of love for these spaces without doing the things that are the essential services that really should be provided for the city? And that when we're relying on volunteers to do these things, then you know, then that is also a way of perpetuating inequity, because if your neighborhood can organize, then great, people get that service. And if you can't, then you don't. And that's not fair or right. But it's a big shift for the city, right? And kind of an expensive one. When one of the things, Erica, so maybe Temwa, if you can hang out, and then we'll start talking about stuff and sort of see where things go. Erica, one number that really stood out to me is that you guys got 7,000 survey responses. So how did you do that? That's a phenomenal number.
Yeah, thank you. We were thrilled because, you know, the mayor's budget survey, I think they got 10,000. So we were like gunning for it, you know. But, you know, I think one thing is that people are passionate about trees, but we didn't want to just have the folks who are passionate tree lovers participate, because like Temwa said, you know, we really wanted to hear the range of different experiences people had with trees. And so I think there are a number of different things we did. You know, one thing was to stop midway and to make sure that we were getting input from those priority areas. And so phone calls, text messages, door hangers, yard signs, you know, all of that stuff really increased we saw a big bump in survey responses. We also sent it out to as many different groups as possible, not just the environmental groups, including immigrant rights organizations, faith-based organizations, as many groups as we possibly could get access to. And we translated it, right? So we got quite a few responses in Chinese and Mandarin, and like I said, responses in 8 different languages. So I think those things had something to do with it. And I also think that the way we talked about giving the survey was very intentional. We said, do you love trees or hate trees? We want to hear from you. And so, you know, I don't believe that there are too many true tree haters. I believe that people dislike trees because of many different things. There are many different ways why people would dislike a tree, but for the most part, people do value them, but they don't want them on their property, right? And so they come across as a tree hater. But we wanted to be very intentional that this was not just like a place for people to come in and talk about how great trees are. This is, you know, we wanted to hear from a range of different people about how their experiences were. So I think there were many things.
Yeah, and hearing from the people who did not want to have a tree there, I mean, that's really informed the plan. Right? I mean, hearing from those people was really important to you guys, and you went out and made sure that you got those voices.
Yes.
And I just have to say, as a member of the Community Voices Steering Committee, I was really proud of the team when they told us that we were able to get 7,000 survey responses. I said, this is really phenomenal. And I don't think that the timeline we did it in was also really amazing. So yeah, I think that is something that's pretty remarkable, but it was intentional. And I was walking around my neighborhood and I saw that very tagline, that saying, do you love trees or hate trees? Take the survey, so that was very, catchy.
Erica, you were mentioning the different ways that you guys want to build out the tree team. How many people are there currently on staff who are managing trees and open space at Parks and Rec?
We have a couple of different teams. There are the natural lands team that cares for over 5,000 acres. There are currently 4 full-time staff people. And so they can manage about 800 of those 5,000 acres in a proactive way. But there is a lot more to do to protect that natural land. And then so
I'm just gonna reinforce this point. There are 4 people to take care of 5,000 acres.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, of complicated forest, meadow, and wetland ecosystems. And
how many people do you have answering the tree help hotline? People want to call and they have questions about trees.
Well, at the street tree office, we have 2. who do that, and they do a lot more than answer the phone. And then downtown we have one, but that is a big recommendation, is to increase the customer service staff. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know what the number is at 311, but you know, you got 3 people who are responding to tree inquiries and complaints of a city of 1.5 million people. Okay.
And we have a street tree management office. We have 7 arborists and inspectors for around 117,000 street trees across the city.
Yeah, that's not enough. Which I'm not telling you, right?
No,
but,
you don't have to tell me.
But I do think that, you know, how is it that we, you know, part of the conversation we wanted to have today is sort of like, how do you take this phenomenal report, but it's going to be 100 pages long, right? And how do we find the ways to be able to talk about that with, you know, folks when Temwa, what, you know, what are the talking points that we have when we run into somebody on the street? And, you know, so one of them is, you know, just trying to talk about heat islands. But how do we find the different pieces here that connect? But you know, if we've got 7 arborists who are trying to tackle a 23,000 tree backlog, that's not enough. On a little bit more of a maybe on a little more of an uplifting note, can you speak a little bit more about the opportunities that you see? You touched on it briefly around workforce development and youth programming around trees.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that can be done in the first few years after planting a tree to really help it establish in its new home, and to do structural pruning to train the structure of the tree so that you can avoid future problems. And a lot of that work requires minimal equipment and supplies, can be done safely with 2 feet on the ground, and can be trained, you know, people can be trained easily to do that. And so there are a lot of opportunities for people to get jobs in their neighborhoods to care for trees, public trees along the streets or in parks. And so that is a very big part of the recommendations for the plan.
That's great. So maybe we'll go to a few of the questions that people have been throwing out there. And one is sort of just asking about the, so I'm gonna riff a little bit on this question, but you know, people love to plant trees, right? But how many you have to plant? If we have planted how many trees, and maybe you could speak to that in the last 10 years. How many trees have we planted, and how much has that increased our tree canopy?
It's a great question. It's very hard to do that type of, I mean, we've lost tree canopy, right? In between 2008 and 2018. And so there was growth in some areas and loss in others. It's a very complicated story. But, you know, so many people have been working so hard. The Pennsylvania Horticultural Society tree tenders have planted thousands and thousands of trees. The city has planted thousands of trees. The Park Friends Network has planted thousands of trees. And yet, yes, we're here where we've lost tree canopy. And so
right.
there are other tools that we need to use to address this problem.
And that's where, I mean, that kind of volunteer and nonprofit partner effort is fantastic, but it's not enough, you know. And if we were thinking about, if we're thinking about other parts of the street, you know, we don't ask volunteers to fill potholes, and we don't ask volunteers to fix traffic lights or replace stop signs, you know, and yet that's the way that we're viewing trees and tree canopy. So you know, I think we need to figure out how we take care of this as infrastructure. I am now officially preaching to the choir, but you know, I think that this is, you know, how do we kind of make this this shift?
One thing I wanted to add, Alex, is I think with the city's goals to increase the tree canopy, it's going to be important to have that, you know, one of the recommendations was to have this centralized person in the city forester, right? But when you think about how many groups are involved in tree care or tree planting, sometimes it's difficult to really assess how much have you done when there's so many different groups. So I think the coordination of the efforts is going to be really important to understanding the growth we have made. And I know that there's, you know, a lot of thoughts put into that. How do we make sure all the people that are working on increasing the tree canopy are helping us tell the story and looking at that data together, so that we can answer a question like, how much have we grown the tree canopy in the last 10 years? Much easier.
And Eric, are trees the sole responsibility of Parks and Rec? Like, how does that forester position help to break down whatever barriers or silos there are that within the city itself, or between the city and other agencies?
Well, having a city forester, one of the main goals of that position is to streamline how the tree requirements in the zoning code are handled and to increase the inspection and enforcement of them. Currently, Parks and Rec does the street tree related zoning code requirements. There's the Planning Commission and L&I, and everyone has a different part. And so streamlining how trees are handled through development is going to really help us protect trees and plant more trees into the future. There are a number of other city agencies that do plant, particularly the water department, of course. They do a lot of planting with the Green City Clean Waters Plan, and street trees are a part of that, and green stormwater infrastructure along our streets and in our public lands is a part of that as well. Otherwise, there really isn't anyone else that handles public trees. Some of the agencies have some of their own in-house staff or contract work, like PHA and the school district. And then PennDOT actually manages some of the trees along some of the major streets as well. But yeah, Parks and Rec takes care of the majority of the publicly accessible trees in the city.
One question that came up here, and I don't know whether this was a part of what you saw in the survey work, but there's the leaf collection then becomes a burden for places that have a lot of trees. Any thoughts on, or does the plan address that? And again, there's something that's not in Parks and Rec's responsibility, right? But is a
Right.
part of solving the tree problem, you know, the burden for tree care.
That is a very, very good question, and a really good point.
Thanks, Walter, for the question. That was a really good question.
Thank you. We haven't addressed tree like leaf litter particularly in the plan itself, but we have written it such that burdens like that come up can be incorporated into those support programs for residents and addressed in the future as a way of meeting that recommendation and that goal. And so, like Alex said, that is something that the streets department does. But I think with a cohesive effort to increase the livability of our city, and litter cleanup and things like that, there are opportunities for coordination amongst the agencies for that type of thing.
Yeah, and certainly if we had a more robust street cleaning program, then a certain amount of that would be solved. Yeah. So Tristan asks a question that is kind of under the control of Parks and Rec, which is like, what's the plan for rec centers and playgrounds to maintain their mature trees and to kind of have a succession plan, I think is succession event of loss of damage.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So one of the things we are really focusing on is succession in our urban forests, and that means many different things. So you know, we don't want to have parks and rec centers that have trees that are all the same species and all the same age. That means that we will probably lose them all around the same time. And that would be a drastic impact. So succession planning is a part of the focus of the plan. Succession planning in terms of adjusting our approved tree lists for climate resilient species is part of it as well. And protecting those large trees. And all of that through the lens of cooperating with the community to make sure that the trees that are being planned for are in line with how the space is used by the community.
If somebody wants, what's a great way for folks to get in touch with, or I assume it's Horticultural Society that's got trees, if somebody wants to do a tree planting?
Oh, there are so many different ways. If you want a tree for the street outside your sidewalk, you know, there are a couple different ways to do that. The Pennsylvania Horticultural Society does have tree tenders groups across the whole city. And so you can get involved with them and submit a permit to get a new tree planted in the sidewalk. The city does that as well. And so I'm happy to take any of those questions and help people individually with whatever it is they're looking for. Like I said, trees don't recognize property values, but people sure do. So it really depends on where you'd like to plant the tree, the mechanism for planting the tree. And I'm happy to help out with that. And that's one of the things we need to improve communication and coordination of into the future so that it's not so complicated that I have to call you and explain it to you.
One person was asking a question about getting in touch with ambassadors in the Strawberry Mansion area. Maybe I can widen that a little bit. What's the role of ambassadors like Temwa as we're moving towards implementation of the plan?
Well, I mean, we have these amazing groups like Temwa's ambassadors. That is Temwa, is that a Park Friends group?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. It is more like a Park Friends group. Yeah. So, and I, you know, it's interesting when you use the term ambassadors because it's been used in a lot of different ways. When we were doing the Tree Philly plan, we had ambassadors that were really responsible for kind of collecting feedback and engaging their neighbors to find out their experiences with trees. And so we call them ambassadors. The ambassadors I'm part of is just the name we've given ourselves to. These are, you know, we care for Cobbs Creek Park. So we're not like a traditional friends group because we just focus on caring for the park, cleaning it, and some tree care and things like that. But yeah, so I think depending on where you are when you hear the term ambassadors, it might vary. So I'm not so sure for the Strawberry Mansion one whether you were thinking about like what kind of ambassadors you're thinking about. The ones that that were created for Tree Philly plan was kind of like a one-time group, although maybe there is a space for them to continue in some capacity post the plan release, but that was kind of like a one and done thing in the beginning.
Right. When we are saying neighborhood ambassadors for the plan, we're really talking about people who were acting as ambassadors for their neighborhood to us to interpret the way that people are interacting with trees in the neighborhoods. But there are many groups that you can get involved with all across the city. We have some wonderful partners who work in Strawberry Mansion and the surrounding areas. So I'm happy to put anyone in touch with folks that are local to them where they can get involved in volunteering and getting trees. I, for some reason, don't have access to the chat where I can post to everyone. So if someone could write my email address into that chat, people can contact me directly. I can only chat with Temwa and Alex for some reason.
We're the only important ones right
still
now.
figuring it out. Oh yeah. Is there anyone else?
Is there anybody else? But I was thinking as Erica was talking, I think this is even more reason why we need like some place or way, you know, place for people to go who have tree questions or tree things. I mean, I remember I was having an issue. I'm like, let me call Erica. And I'm like, I know Erica probably has like a million other things and responsibilities besides, responding to my tree concerns, but
No.
but I not at all, right? But I do. There's so much happening, and that's one of the things I learned participating in this, process. There's so many groups that are involved, so many groups you can connect with. I mean, in across the city, but the information is not really centralized, so it's not that easy to access.
Sean asks a question, which I sort of put to both of you, is it possible to use groups like tree tenders to target paid maintenance by neighborhood and or creating a summer jobs program for teens to do this? Like what opportunities, you spoke to it a little bit, Erica, but what opportunities do you see there in tree maintenance, connecting to neighborhoods? But it's kind of like finding that volunteer enthusiasm, but also paying for services. There might be a sweet spot there, right?
Yeah, I think there is a sweet spot. And I think we have some examples of how that's been done well in the past. In West Philadelphia, there's a group called UC Green. And in the past, they've had a teen summer program called UC Green Core, where the students got training, got a green job for the summer, and watered the trees that the tree tenders had planted. It was highly successful, and it was documented as successful by the Forest Service. They did survivability studies to show the impact of that establishment care. And so I think when it comes to caring for trees in that establishment phase, that it's very ripe for this type of local paid program to do that type of thing. I think there are great opportunities there.
One thing I wanted to just show off a little bit is that Temwa, when we're talking about what the particular neighborhoods are, we've taken the mapping data that Eric's team has come up with, sort of presented in PDF form there. But on our website now, you can go ahead and look at Cobbs Creek and where these different priority areas are. And I find Cobbs Creek to be so interesting because when you look at there's forest there, right? That's across the parkway, and then that's the priority need that we have, in that space. But we're kind of hoping that that people's chance to kind of dig in and be able to look at this, and then also be able to look at the temperature differences, and then also be able to see why it is that those priority areas are there. There's a real reason for why we need to get at that. And then we also want to make sure that folks know about here we go. Okay, if you we're just going to repeat the texting line that you can use to suggest questions that we should be asking the mayor, and maybe one of the ways that we can close here is Temwa, what question would you like us to ask the mayor? Not to put you on the spot.
Wow! Oh my goodness! Well, it's so funny that you asked that, because before the question, the way I would phrase it is kind of like, future mayor of Philadelphia, do you understand the intersectionality between, an increased urban forest and safety in our neighborhoods, or some other key issue that might be more pressing for either, other residents or even them as a candidate? So I think there's certain issues that we talk about a lot more in Philadelphia. For example, gun violence. Everybody is concerned about that. So how do we connect the need for a growing urban forest with what we've seen in the data, in terms of the neighborhoods that have less safety and other things like that? So I think that's how I would phrase it. Do you know that there are these connections, and that when you do take on this issue, you're also helping this other issue in another way.
Well, that's great because it also gives us a little bit of a segue. Steve, maybe you can put into the chat the links to our upcoming webinars, because one of those is when we're talking about clean and safe, which we're going to be doing in January. Part of that's the conversation about what's the sort of common sense says, yeah, if we take care of spaces, that feels safer, and that's where we've got some real concrete evidence-based studies here in Philadelphia that show the importance of taking care of public spaces and vacant lots and trees, and what impact that has on violence. Which is, I mean, what are the main things that the next mayor is going to be talking about, right? They're going to have to talk about how it is that you're going to move the poverty, move the needle on the high rate of poverty in the city of Philadelphia, and that's about getting neighborhood jobs, improving education, and the way the Parks and Rec can participate that is in out of school time activities. And then how it is that we're creating safe and clean spaces and safe spaces for everybody, but particularly for young people, for students, and for teens and young adults. So I'm just ending with my riffing off of your advocacy there, and appreciate both of you. Appreciate both of you being here. So Craig, you had a question about where's the website URL for the maps. Go to parksrecheroes.org and you can find it there. And if you can't find it there, I have done a bad job designing that website. So you should be able to just go right to the Rec at Philly page, and you'll be able to see that there. Thank you both for everything that you're doing. Erica, thank you for leading the team on this phenomenal plan. Temwa, thank you for being a part of that plan. Thank you for everything you do in Cobbs Creek. And hopefully folks will be able to join us for our webinar next week. So that's all I was trying to do.
Alex, I don't want to rush you off, but I do know there's a couple unanswered questions. I know Erica was trying to type her response to one. Because I know there's like 10 more minutes. So the one you were trying to type, Erica, maybe you could just speak it out loud if you haven't typed it yet. Did you see one?
Yeah, I was answering a couple of questions in the Q&A box. One of them is about deer exclosures, which I was just saying is extreme. It absolutely is extremely important. We have a very, very large deer population, and when it comes to our forested areas, they create a huge problem. So we have to fence a lot of our restoration projects, and we have addressed that problem with a recommendation in the plan. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to leave those people hanging when they showed up for the webinar and couldn't get that answer. So
Temwa, you're watching out for
yeah, you're a good moderator.
Watching out for us, watching out for everybody else. We gotta bring you back. You're good at this.
That's all good.
Yeah, and I put my email again in a couple of the answers, because I think when it comes to specific questions about whether people can get a tree or connect to groups in their neighborhood, I'm happy to talk that through. I just need more information, so.
Great.
All right. Well, download our infographics and go forth and prosper, and let's convince the next mayor that we need to fund this tree plan. So thank you all for spending some time with us this evening, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.